Chapter 103, Hopes and Fears. We must now go back to the preceding day and introduce our readers to Markham Place immediately after the buffer had called upon Richard in the manner already described. Richard had received him in the library and had there heard the exciting news of which the buffer was the bearer. Dismissing the man to the kitchen to partake of some refreshment, Richard hastened to the parlor where Mr. Monroe and Ellen were seated. The past sorrows and anxieties which the young man had experienced were now all forgotten. Forgotten also was the dread exposure which he had so recently received at the theater, an exposure which had deprived him of the honorable renown earned by his own talent, an exposure, too, which had induced Ellen to abandon that career wherein she excelled so preeminently. The idea of meeting his well-beloved brother now alone occupied his mind. The hope of seeing and even succoring the wanderer banished every other consideration. His cheek, lately so pale, was flushed with a glee of animation, and his eyes glistened with delight as he rushed into the room where Ellen and her father were seated. "Eugene has returned. My brother has come back at last," he exclaimed. "Your brother," repeated Ellen, a deadly pallor spreading over her countenance. "Eugene," cried Mr. Monroe in a tone of deep interest. "Yes, Eugene is in London, is returned," answered Richard, not noticing the strange impression which his words had made and still produced upon Ellen, who now sat incapable of motion in her chair as if she were suddenly paralyzed. "Eugene is in London. A man has just been to tell me this welcome news, and I am to see my brother tomorrow evening." "Tomorrow evening," said Mr. Monroe, "and why not now, at once?" "Alas, my brother is in some difficulty and dares not appear at the dwelling of his forefathers. I am not aware of the nature of that dilemma, but I am assured that he has need of my help." "Where are you to meet him?" inquired Monroe, somewhat surprised by the singularity of this announcement. "At the eastern extremity of London, on the banks of the canal, near some place called Twig Folly." "And at what hour?" demanded the old man. "Tomorrow night at 10 precisely," was the reply. "Do you know the man who brought you this message, or have you received a letter?" asked Ellen, who now began to breathe more freely. "No, I never saw the man before, nor have I any letter, but surely you cannot suppose that anyone is deceiving me in so cruel a manner." Yeah, come on, Richard, you've lived. You know people do this all the time." "Ah, I feel convinced of it," said Ellen, with peculiar emphasis on her words and warmth in her manner. No, impossible," cried Markham, unwilling to allow the hope which had a moment ago appeared so bright to be obscured by the mists of doubt. Then, acting upon a sudden impulse, he rang the bell violently. Whittingham speedily made his appearance. "The man that I have just sent below," said Richard hastily, "has come to inform me that my brother is in London." "Master Eugene is in London?" said the old butler, forgetting his gravity and literally beginning to dance with joy. "And he has appointed to meet me tomorrow evening in a very distant and lonely part of London," continued Markham. "This circumstance seems suspicious, strange, at least so Miss Monroe thinks." "Nay, I do not think, Richard, I am sure," exclaimed Ellen with the same emphasis which had marked her previous declaration. "Okay, it's because, I'm convinced, right, that Mr. Greenwood, is Richard's brother, and she would know that because Mr. Greenwood is the father of her child. So now I'm thinking, if I'm right in that, and I'm hoping I am, that Ellen will go to him and say, 'Hey, did you actually send this message? Because if you didn't send the message, Richard is in a lot of trouble.' So, okay, come on." "At all events, Whittingham," said Markham, do you return to the kitchen, get into conversation with the man, and then give us your opinion." The old butler withdrew to execute these orders. Markham then began to pace the room in an agitated manner. "I cannot think who could be cruel enough to practice such a vile cheat upon me. Hello! Oh, but he thinks the Resurrection Man is dead. No, he knows he's not because he knew it was his voice at the theater. Come on, Richard, think about it. Okay." I get too excited about these stories, I can't just read them. Okay. "I cannot think who could be cruel enough to practice such a vile cheat upon me," he said, "if a cheat it really be. No one would benefit in doing so. Besides, the man spoke of the appointment which my brother made when we departed on yonder hill. He spoke of that appointment as a token of his sincerity, as a proof of the veracity of his statement, as an evidence that he came direct from Eugene." "Many persons are acquainted with the fact of that appointment," said Ellen. "There's not an individual in this neighborhood who is ignorant of the meeting that is named for the 10th of July, 1843, between the ash trees on that hill." "True," exclaimed Markham. "The mere mention of that appointment is scarcely a sufficient evidence, and yet my brother might deem that it would prove sufficient. Eugene may not know how suspicious the deceits of this world are calculated to render the mind that has been their victim." I have no doubt that Eugene is by this time as well acquainted with the world as you be, Richard, persisted Ellen, and I am also convinced that if he were to send such a message to you as this stranger has brought, making an appointment at a strange place and at a very lonely hour, he would have been careful to accompany it with some undeniable token of genuineness. You reason sensibly, Ellen, said Markham, and yet I am by no means inclined to surrender up the hope that was just now so consoling to my heart, wounded as that heart is by many misfortunes. I reason consistently with your interests, returned Ellen. Nothing could persuade me that your brother would fail to write a line to you in such a case as this is presented to be. What say you, Mr. Monroe? Inquired Richard. I am hesitating between the two arguments, answered the old man. I know not whether to encourage the hope to which you cling or to suffer myself to be persuaded by the reasoning of Ellen. At this moment Whittingham returned to the parlor. Although he didn't show his credentials, my firm impression is that he was really the representation of the court he said he come from. You questioned him closely? Asked Markham. You know, Master Richard, I can put a poser or two now and then, and if this man had been an impostor, I should have circumvented him pretty soon, I can assure you. He answered your questions in a straightforward manner, then? Persisted Richard. He couldn't have been more straightforward, replied Whittingham. I'm sure he's an honest, simple-hearted, well-meaning man. No, he's not. Ah! Then it is decided, said Richard. I will go to this appointment. Who knows in what peril my poor brother may be? Who can say from what dangers I may save him? Who can explain what powerful motives he may have for the nature of the appointment he has made, and the caution he has adopted in making it? I should be wrong to allow a suspicion to interfere with the duty. Were anything serious to happen to Eugene through the want of a friend at this moment, how should I ever reproach myself? I will not incur such a chance. I will go tomorrow evening to the spot named and to the hour appointed. Whittingham withdrew, and Ellen once more endeavored to deter Richard from his resolution. In the name of God, reflect, she exclaimed with an earnestness which, had he not been otherwise preoccupied, would have struck him by its peculiarity, for it seemed rather the impassioned expression of a conviction based on indisputable grounds than a doubt which had been based on truth or error. In the name of God, reflect, Richard, ere you endanger your life, perhaps, by going at a suspicious hour to a lonely place. Remember, you have enemies. Recollect how nearly you met your death at the hands of one villain in the neighborhood of Birdcage Walk, the narrative of which occurred in your miraculous escape you have so often related to us. Reflect that that was not the only occasion on which the same miscreant has sought to injure you. I know what you allude to, Ellen, said Markham significantly, and I thank you sincerely for your interest in my behalf. But believe me, there is no resurrection man in the present manner. All is straightforward. I can feel convinced of it. No, you just want so badly to see your brother that she'll believe anything. Come on, Richard, listen to Ellen. She's making sense. Markham uttered these words in a tone which left no scope for further argument or remonstrance, and Ellen threw herself back in her chair, a prey to reflections of the most painful nature. At length she retired to her chamber to meditate in secret upon the incident of the morning. What can I do, she mused aloud, to convince Richard Markham that he is nursing a delusion? I tremble lest some enemy should meditate treachery against him. Perhaps even his life may be threatened. Oh, the plots, the perfidies, the villainies which are engendered in this London. But how to warn him? How to prove to him that he is deceived? Alas, that is impossible, unless, indeed... But she shook her head impatiently, as if to renounce as impracticable the idea which had for a moment occupied her mind. No, she continued, that were madness indeed, and yet what can be done? He must not be allowed to rush headlong and blindly into danger, for that danger awaits him, I feel convinced. Perhaps that terrible man from whose power he once escaped and who denounced him at the theater may be the instigator of all this, and if such be the fact, then who knows where the atrocity of that miscreant may stop? Murder, cold-blooded, ruthless murder may be the result of this mysterious appointment. And the murder of whom? Said Ellen, a shudder passing like a cold chill over her entire frame. The murder of my benefactor, of the noble-minded, the generous-hearted young man who gave us an asylum when all the world forsook us. Oh, no, it must not be. I dare not tell him all I know, but I can do somewhat to protect him. Come on, Ellen, you gotta help Richard. She smiled, in spite of the unpleasant nature of the emotions that agitated her bosom. She smiled because a wild and romantic idea had entered her imagination. Without further hesitation, and acting under the sudden impulse of that idea, she sat down and wrote a short note. When she had sealed and addressed it, she rang the bell. In a few moments, Marian answered the summons. My faithful friend, said Ellen, I am about to put your goodness to another test, but before I explain what I require of you, I beseech that you will not that you will not now endeavor to penetrate my motives. You shall know all the day after tomorrow." "Speak, miss, I am always ready to do anything I can for you," said Marian. "In the evening," continued Ellen, "you must find a pretense to go out for 2 or 3 hours. In the first instance, you must call at Mr. Greenwood's house." "Mr. Greenwood's?" said Marian. "Yes, but your business is not this time with him. On the contrary, he must not know the real motive of your visit, which is to deliver this note into the hands of his Italian valet, Filippo." "I forgot about him! Yes, Ellen, that's the perfect person to talk to." "You have never seen Filippo, for he entered the service of Mr. Greenwood since you called there some months ago. You cannot, however, mistake him. He is a tall, dark man with long curling hair. Moreover, he speaks English with a strong foreign accent." "The description is sufficient, miss," said Marian. "I shall not be mistaken. This note is to be delivered into his hands and his only. Should you meet Mr. Greenwood by accident, you may say, 'I am come from Miss Monroe to inform you that your child is well and thriving.' This will be an excuse. I must leave the rest to you, but I implore you to do all you can to obtain an interview with Filippo." "I will follow your wishes, miss, to the utmost of my power," returned Marian. And when you know the motives of my present proceeding," said Ellen, "you will be satisfied with the part you have taken in it." "I do not doubt you, miss," observed Marian. "Have you seen the dear little baby lately?" "I saw him yesterday," answered Ellen. "I called at Mr. Wentworth's. The excellent man's wife was nursing my little Richard. I took him in my arms and fondled him, but alas, he cried bitterly. Of course he does not know me. He will learn to look up to a stranger as his mother. Ah, Marian, that idea pierced like a dagger to my very heart." "Cheer up, miss," exclaimed Marian in a kind tone. "Better days will come." "But never the day, Marian," added Ellen solemnly, "when I can proclaim myself the mother of that child, nor blush to mention its father's name." Okay, that's the end of that chapter. Okay, here's hoping Marian really does find Filippo and that Filippo really does intercede on Richard's behalf and save him, because he's about to get himself into a lot of trouble. Okay, see you for the next chapter.